3 years ago, Netflix was the model, and that was never going to have an ad, always going to charge top dollar as a subscription, and ads were antithetical to our purpose. And now, obviously, they have one of the largest ad tiers. And so that's table stakes now.
Hello, fellow data nerds. My guest today is Michael Barrett. Michael is the CEO of Magnite, one of the largest independent sell-side advertising companies. Magnite's ticker is MGNI on NASDAQ and currently has a $2.3 billion market cap. Before Magnite, Michael served as the CEO of Millennial Media and also was the Chief Revenue Officer at Yahoo. Michael, welcome to World of DaaS.
Thanks, Auren. Pumped to be here. First time, long time.
Yeah, big fan of yours. Now, now linear, we've been friends for a long time. Linear TV, which is kind of like for people who don't know or just kind of like listening, or just kind of like old school TV ads, still is a huge market. It's probably 60 billion-ish market of ad revenue, and still double what connected TV does. What is that like? How do you expect that trend to go over the next decade?
Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing to look at it is consumers have kind of voted, particularly in North America and increasingly globally. And they've chosen to consume their media, entertainment, news, sports via streaming in kind of backing away from the cable bundle. Yep. So you have all these eyeballs, and in many cases, they're the most treasured eyeballs from an advertising standpoint.
They tend to be more wealthier.
That's exactly right. Younger, wealthier. Haven't made brand decisions that for the rest of their life where, try to get me to switch toothpaste at this stage is probably ain't going to happen. So yep. I think largely speaking, there's always been a lag. Whenever a new media comes along, there's always been a lag between hours spent on the new medium versus traditional. And it takes a while, but, we're seeing a big kick and inflection point, and we're seeing all of the large linear broadcasters launch AVOD services, which it seems self-evident now, but 3 years ago, Netflix was the model, and that was never going to have an ad, always going to charge top dollar as a subscription, and ads were antithetical to our purpose. And now, obviously, they have one of the largest ad tiers, and so that's table stakes now. So,
at what point do you think like connected TV is going to surpass linear TV in terms of like advertising dollars?
So it's already surpassed in terms of hours watched. So more people are consuming streaming than they are broadcast in the States. And so, if you look at the charts, streaming's supposed to be growing in the 20+% CAGR for the next, 4 or 5 years. Linear slightly down. So it's going to pass in 3-4 years or so. Probably it always happens faster than we think, right? We look back at it and we're like, 5 years seemed aggressive and it turned out to be 3 years. So I would say the next 3 years.
Yeah. I mean, it's faster, but then it's also slower than I would have expected too, right?
Well, how many times have we, in the early days of, websites, bemoan the fact that print was still getting more money than the internet.
Right.
The internet had all the people in the world on it. It just takes time. That's all.
And so, where do you think like AI is going to play in beyond obviously for like content generation? AI is going to have a huge impact, but how is it going to change like programmatic advertising?
Well, I think there's going to be several applications of it, and probably 5 more that I haven't even thought of that'll probably disrupt the whole industry and put Magnite out of business. But I think one of the most exciting aspects of AI as it relates to programmatic, and specifically in streaming, CTV, connected television, is the idea of the elimination of a severe barrier to SMB, small, medium-sized businesses being able to advertise in the broadcast environment. The creative hurdle to be able to produce creative that's approved by the broadcasters and goes through that system is prohibitively expensive and frankly doesn't actually meet the needs of these advertisers. So therefore, they have been spending all their money on social because of the idea that they know what they're getting for their dollar. They are able to create creative quickly, facile, and I think with AI being able to generate advertisements for these SMBs, you're going to see a world where streaming today is essentially trying to catch the broadcast dollars and bring them into the streaming world. And that's the world of 500 to 1,000 advertisers. And I think you fast forward with AI enabled creative capabilities and enhanced targeting capabilities, you're going to see a world of 15,000 advertisers. And
And
that's what
why is the creative such a high barrier? Like when I was a kid, there was always that like jinky car dealer ad. There was the crazy Eddie, like everything's insane. There's all those types of things. Like you've always, I mean, you just with a back in the day, you had a camcorder and a crazy guy. Like, why do you need? Why is AI so important to this?
because that was back in the days where there was fringe time and there was local time and it was local
Yeah.
cable. We're talking prime time now. I mean, you're
So you need
essentially
to have like
saying,
a super quality
I'm
ad.
going to advertise on Disney Plus,
Yeah.
and I'm going to advertise nationally. I'm going to target, so I'll be very select, but I'm not, in this kind
But
of
why do you need
fringe.
to advertise that nationally? You can be advertising for your local, yoga studio or something in the zip codes that are important to you, right?
There's no question, and that happens, and that's one of the biggest impacts right now on linear, and that is on the local station level. The concept of local now is just IP targeting, right?
Yeah.
By household, it's no longer, it's that Channel 4 programming in the tri-state area that I have to advertise in. And so now everything becomes local. Netflix becomes local because you can target wherever you want to target. So, but the bar of entry in terms of creative is still high. And Netflix isn't going to be taking Crazy Eddie anytime soon. And so, ergo, if you're
So
going to attract
they
those,
actually want like really they actually care about the content, and they're not gonna. So if I'm just like a talking head, they don't want me on there.
I
Like
think at
if
this,
it's my local yoga studio, like, and I just like come up there in my Lululemon outfit, they're not going to want that. They're going to want something like higher production value.
yeah, and you never could do that in Friends on a Thursday night. They weren't going to run the local yoga either. So listen, there's a plethora of inventory out there, and we always think of CTV as just being the province of the big plus services. Uh,
Yeah.
but you have a Samsung, LG, Vizio doing billions of dollars in advertising on their free TV
Yep.
channels, the fast channels, and so there's always going to be a home for that type of advertising. But again, the creative has been a barrier, and I think that AI is going to play a huge role in unleashing that.
I have found that the ads today do just seem less interesting and less creative than ads of a few decades ago. Maybe that's just like an old guy being like, it was better in my day or something like that. But do you agree? Do you think like the ads are just less good and less compelling than they once were?
I think you go to a festival like Cannes and you see some of the creativity, and it almost always isn't America. It's always international. That's
Yeah.
cheeky, that's pushes the envelope, that is funny, memorable. I think, we've kind of gotten risk averse in a lot of the
Yeah. The
advertising
ads
we
are
do.
so bland, so
Yeah.
risk averse. I agree.
Uh,
Yeah.
and I think that is something that's a shame because, as you point out, there used to be some iconic brands in advertising that existed.
How do you think like influencers are going to play into this? Because they're usually little lot less at risk averse. People are following these influencers directly. How are they going to kind of play in the advertising landscape?
Well, obviously, they play a huge role now in terms of sponsored brands and in some cases even television type ads running in the streams. I think they've had a hard time crossing over. I mean, you look at something like a Mr. Beast and some of the challenges of trying to get an influencer in this world to exist in kind of a programmed content world.
Yeah.
So I think, listen, they'll thrive. Advertisers are all over them. It's been meaningful. But I don't necessarily think it'll be just the easy transfer, and the shows and programs that you watch will all be influencer driven.
Now we're seeing like a bunch of players emerging in like the retail media world. Where do you think that's going to kind of shake up in the ad tech landscape?
Yeah, it's been a huge impact as you have existing big advertisers like a Walmart and Amazon creating their own, retail media networks. And that has a
Instacart
huge,
now is doing that, right?
right. And folks that have never been in the advertising business before, the whole travel segment, they sit on some of the most valuable loyalty data, and it's voluminous, and they're all getting into the media game. So, I do think it'll run its course as it relates to not everyone's going to be able to run their own retail media network, and there'll be fatigue on the same advertisers or CPG clients that they all go to and try to hit them up to shift spend onto their platforms. But it's a huge impact in the advertising technology world, largely because this is all automated. It's all super targeted. And so therefore it's all programmatic by and large. And that's right into ad tech's wheelhouse.
I mean, it's both like a good thing, but also sometimes a bad thing for a consumer when you're, searching for a random product on Amazon. And it seems like 1 out of 4, 1 out of 3 things you see is an ad. And sometimes it's an ad for something that you would have seen anyway. So it's not clear how effective it is or what it's cannibalizing. Like, are we at like peak retail media, or is it just going to keep going and going and going?
I think we're in early innings. I think we're going to see more and more. I mean, I think the what you're starting to see, what you pointed to, was kind of the user experience, on the owned and operated media that an Amazon has, right? They control it. If it's listing, you don't know if it's sponsored or not. I think what you're going to start to see more of is those type ads being targeted to Auren on a TV show that he loves, that's part of the retail media network or commerce media, where off property you're going to start to see ads that are more targeted, that are backed up by data, and that try to bring you back into the commerce purchase.
And or like these CPG brands, they're spending like, historically they've always spent like billions annually on trade promotion, product placement in stores, little advertisements in stores, getting it at, your eye level as opposed to the below level on the shelves, right? And that's always had like tough attribution. If you're enjoying this podcast, please sign up for our newsletter. Go to worldofdas.com. The link is in the description below. Now back to the video. And it's also been like a tax where these like trade promotions was a tax on the retailers that were charging, which were basically the tax would be extracted from the brands. Are the retail media networks just kind of digitizing that dynamic, or is it just taking that from one to another? Or how do you see that evolution?
It's certainly building on the backbone of that, correct? The whole idea of targeted in-store, and now the store is the website. Yep. However, if you go to a Walmart or a Target, there's a whole different group of guys, gals, executives that handle the in-store, and they have a budget, and they have for years fed off of those end aisle caps and in-store promotions. Yep. And the last thing they want to do is see that bleed just 1 for 1 into a retail media network in terms of media.
Good point. Yeah.
So it's actually, they're trying to double down on it. So the very same guys that are sometimes being forced to advertise themselves, they have a business model that really predicates that retail media networks have to be found dollars, not just shifted dollars.
Yeah, it seems tough. So if you're like a random CPG soap company or something like that, right? You got to pay to get the right in-store things. That might be the discovery. Then you've got to pay just for general brand awareness, right? So general brand kind of things that go on. Then you have to pay on the website when people are shopping on the whatever.com type of thing. Like at some point, either like prices are going to go up, or you just like the margins are going to go down. Like it seems like they're in a tougher spot than the Walmarts of the world. Or do you disagree?
No, and as you pointed out, there's already fatigue because even though it's great signals, the being able to track the purchase in the ad, but as you pointed out, that person's going to buy Dove soap because they always buy Dove soap.
Yeah.
Are they buying more Dove soap because of the ad? And are people who don't buy Dove soap buying it? And I think that there's real fatigue that's starting, and there's still a real belief in brand building, right? God
Oh
bless
yeah.
the
There's some brands
Proctors of the world
that
where,
people just get. You just like I still I mean I'm totally maybe I'm super old school, but I love Ivory soap. Like I
yeah,
still love it. I might be like I'm probably the youngest Ivory soap buyer in America. Like probably everyone else is like over 80 or something. But I still love. I still think it's a great like product, and like for whatever reason I grew up on it, and I just like it, and I just enjoy it. But like you build these habits maybe in your 20s or something, and then you kind of stick to them throughout your life.
yeah, and you look at the last recession that we just went through, or I guess we never went through a recession, or we went through seven, depending on your point of view. But the simple fact is that the folks that were able to keep pricing or increase pricing during that period of time were the very folks that built brands and had
Yeah.
folks resonate with it and say, "I'm not switching
Yeah.
to a store brand."
I mean, Coca-Cola is just an incredible brand, and
Yeah,
like people like they just remember it from their childhood, and it's like this enduring brand. The newest soda, the Omni Pop soda, which is cool and everything, like it's unclear if that's even going to be around in 10 years, because like it's hard to build something so enduring that's going to
right.
last for so long.
Yeah.
Now, how do you think of the role of data in ad tech? Like, how is the change? I mean, you and I have been in this data. I mean, you've been in the business even longer than I have. Like, we've been friends for a long time talking about data and ad tech. Like, how do you think that has been evolving over the last 15 years?
Well, it's really the oxygen to the whole ecosystem, right? It wouldn't programmatic advertising technology wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the concept of coupling data against media to make it more targeted, more effective, and
Yep.
better ROI. And all the apparatus that has been built around that concept. These targeted advertising infused with data signals. So I think that it's just absolutely essential to the story and this the purpose. I think what you're seeing is obviously privacy concerns. That's been the story for the last 5-7 years, from GDPR to
Data
state
about because
initiatives.
data about a consumer, what we're allowed
That's
to know
right.
about the consumer. Maybe it's fine to know that they're in this DMA or something, but you might not want to be targeting all the way down to their house or whatever it might be.
Right. And it's a very messy world because there's different restrictions in different areas of the world, even in
Yep.
different states. And so, it's probably the only time that the industry is all leaning into a federal solution because it's becoming damn near impossible to be able to run your same playbook across the states, let alone Europe, let alone APAC. So I think that what we've seen is obviously a acute rise in consumer privacy that's being watched closely. But also, I think with the part of the privacy initiative, and sometimes it's not purely beneficial in terms for the consumer, but the demise of the third-party cookie has really kind of changed the game plan in the playbook for targeted advertising. And what we're seeing is more of a shift to the value of the publisher and their relationship with their user and able to
Because they've got
create.
some sort of context too around the content that they're, if you have
Right.
this great pickleball content or something like that, well, you
That's
have a
right.
sense of the type of person that might be watching or engaging with that content.
Yeah, and to date, I mean, it's always been something that the buyers have kind of eschewed because there's been this lack of scale aspect to it.
Yeah.
But more and more, they're leaning on tech partners like a Magnite and others that can take that pickleball content from 1,000 publishers, bring it all into one pickleball segment, and now it's scaled, and buyers trust it and are able to buy it that way. So yeah, there's been a big shift that's going to only increase to publishers being able to participate in this data economy, which is really important. It's tough being a publisher these days, and if you can make money
it
off
seems
of
like
it,
these bigger guys that all have access to all the data, right? The Metas, the Googles, the Apples, Amazons of the world. They have this great quote unquote first party data, and it seems like for whatever reason, like the privacy rules have been like, hey, you can collect as much first party data as you want. You could do whatever you want with the first party data. You could do this crazy, insane targeting, but like you can't like, which obviously is very good for the very, very big players. But like, hey, if you want to like, if two people want to come together and work together on something, well, now you can't do that. Like that's terrible. And so it's been like, and probably because the big players were the ones writing the rules, like they're the ones in the room when the legislation gets created, or I don't know, that's my conspiracy theory, but I'd love to get your take on it.
No, there, yeah, when you have the terms of service for billions of people, and it's just click here, we've changed our terms of service, and it's 300 pages
we
long.
Can do whatever we want, right?
It's page 219, paragraph 3. Yeah, it's hard. It's very difficult. And they, in order to have a full experience, and a lot of the social, walled gardens, you need to have presence, right? You need to be. Folks need to know who you are. It only adds to the experience, and so having this perfect fidelity in terms of signaling and latitude of what you can do with it, it's a pretty good business model.
Yeah, that does seem like, why can't there be like a first party layer on top of all the third parties? Like people have been talking about this a while. Like why can't like all the publishers kind of get together and be like, okay, we're now part of this quote unquote federated network, and it's all kind of first party-esque. Yeah, maybe it's a different URL, but it's all kind of first party. We share, maybe even people pay a very small fee so they can get access to all the content or something like that, but they're all part of it. And you understand you're part of this first party network. Like, is that just like impossible? Like, it's impossible for people to kind of get along and stuff? Because no one's just going to join like Hearst or something.
Yeah.
Like it does, you kind of want something a little bit bigger than that.
Yeah, I think it has been tried. There've been plenty of startups. Heck, I invested in one of them. It didn't actually work out. It's really hard. I think that generally speaking, there's always this imbalance of practicality versus perception. And when folks sit at the table and you get 20 big publishers, they all feel as though there's more special. They deserve more or better terms.
Yeah,
they're the ones.
But they're all dying together. Like they're all getting killed, and just because they need to somehow work together, but they don't. It's that prisoner's dilemma thing, and it's just maybe because it's not just if it's two players they'd be able to do it, but there's like 200 players and they're just not able to. Well, yeah, I'm just way better than them. I don't want to help this guy because they see that other publisher more as their competitor than they do as like a partner.
Yeah, or as opposed to really figuring out who the real competitor are, which is the walled gardens where all the money are going to.
Yeah. Interesting. And speaking of walled gardens, like, are they going to become even more powerful? Certainly, like in the last 15 years, they've just every year just become more and more powerful. Now they're new walled gardens, so maybe each individual is slightly less because they have competition amongst themselves, which maybe they didn't have before. But are the walled gardens collectively going to be more powerful in the future, or do you think now it's going to be the Rebel Alliance is actually going to take in and take down the Death Star?
It's hard to believe that they could become more powerful. That would be saying then that marketers are comfortable with 95% of their budget going to walled gardens and 5% going to the rest of the world. So I think they may have reached a zenith, but I don't see a rapid decline as some have predicted. The ease of use, again, going to small to medium-sized businesses, how easy it is to use. You drop a credit card, you have the data, you have the targeting. that's not going away. I do think the excitement in the ad industry is this pool of dollars that has been outside the digital grasp, and that is the broadcast dollars, right? The linear
Yeah.
dollars. And that necessarily just isn't going to tumble to the walled gardens. Some Google owns
Some goes
YouTube,
to
Amazon
YouTube or
owns
whatever. Yeah.
Prime. They'll be a perfect home to capture some those dollars, but others don't have the equivalency of a broadcast type experience and a broadcast type of ad. And so I think that is going to really benefit legacy media in that regards from their streaming platforms that they're creating.
How do you think like the role of the middleware providers have changed in ad tech?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been a constant theme of kind of consolidation and weeding out that there have been a long history of kind of middleware guys that really were just in it for the arbitrage and weren't providing any additional value. And little by little, the buyers, whether it's a DSP or an agency, have kind of gotten wise to kind of the supply chain economics of those plays. So that's kind of going away. At the same time, DSPs and their agency partners want to buy from fewer partners. And so therefore, even if you did have a really good, innovative ad unit on 300 of the best publishers around the world, in order for that business to work, you needed to call on those publishers, get the unit on the page, then hire a team to go call on agencies and DSPs, point them in your direction and buy your special sauce. And now what agencies and DSPs are saying is like, okay, I get it. It's good, but I'm buying from three guys now. Put it on that guy's platform, and I'll just buy it from that. And it's actually quite liberating to those middleware guys because now they don't have to hire a publisher sales team. They can just come to someone like us or our competitors and say, hey, I've got this cool thing. Plug it into your exchange, and I've already told the buyers it's going to be there, and they'll buy it from you. So I think you're seeing kind of a collapsing of what was an incredibly confusing and inefficient ecosystem of middleware.
And for those listening who don't know, like a DSP is kind of a advertising technology company that represents the ad buyer, and the most the DSP that is now the most preeminent is the Trade Desk. There used to be a ton of DSPs. In fact, when you and I met, like I don't even know the Trade Desk even had started yet.
No.
And so they kind of overtook. Why did they win? Like, why are they doing so well? I mean, yes, the CEO, Jeff Green, he's an incredible operator. He's one of the best in the business, but it's still unclear to me, like why they ran the tables and why they won so big.
I ask that question a lot and have just nothing but the utmost respect for Jeff and the Trade Desk. Built a great product, right? But that doesn't always ensure that you're going to win. But they did build an easy to use product in a world where everything was getting more complex. They went to market with two differences that they did in go-to-market strategy. One was they didn't want to get into the managed business. They did not want to hire a bunch of folks,
which was agency friendly, right?
Correct. So they didn't want to do the managed business. So they were willing to forego that, kind of easy revenue, call it kind of ad networky revenue. And they too went after a group that folks had given up on, which was the agencies, the meeting masks, the turns. They're like, I'm going right to the client. The client of the agency. I don't want to deal with these guys. They have too much pricing power. They're just going to jam me down every time we renew. And the Trade Desk ran the table on picking up the biggest users and train them on the software. So now it's super sticky. The agency operates the software, not Trade Desk. And they just, from there, that started a momentum that they caught a couple lucky breaks. There was consolidation, a lot of M&A that didn't
Yep.
work out, and some guys just went by the wayside. So they had they've had an unbelievable run.
I think it's a tough business because like the whole system, the whole stack basically changes like every 5 years. And so you have a lot of creative destruction because you're doing well in one system and all of a sudden everything changes and now your company is no longer positioned to do well. So you see a lot of like folks, and then some companies like yourself, like the Trade Desk, et cetera, have been able to ride multiple waves. Um, uh, how do you walk us through some of those changes over the last 5 years, and then we can get to like where you think some of the changes are going?
Yeah, and that's partly one of the tough things about being a public ad tech company is that generally speaking, your biggest investors are generalists, and
Yeah,
it's really difficult to understand the nuance. And then they see something that's cataclysmic, and they're like, "Well, that's going to happen every 5 years. So how can I possibly be a long-term holder of your
totally.
stock? I don't get
Yeah,
it." Uh,
yeah,
and so that's something we battle all the time. Sometimes we win, sometimes we don't. But I think the biggest changes over the course, when we talk some about the privacy aspects of it and the targeting, but largely speaking, the battle with Google was the story of the last chapter, right? Google had such a dominance in their implementation of their software, their ad server, which came via an acquisition, and their ad exchange, which was partly built, partly an acquisition. And so the open web, the non-Google folks, I would say that the last era was all about trying to battle Google's dominance, and certain practices came to be to try to compete against them. I don't want to get too arcane on a call it's just not ad tech, but header bidding, for instance, this unified auction of putting everything
yeah.
together was direct response to Google's dominance.
But
And I
it
think
seemed to like make Google even stronger. So I don't know. I'm not even sure if it did. It did work. Yeah,
it it basically didn't dent Google. It
yeah.
did help. It did help. It did create more
It made things
competition.
more efficient for sure, right?
Creative. It was, but incredibly harmful from an efficiency standpoint. To if you want to dial back up and the planet we live on in terms of the amount of calls and CPUs and all the volume being done on the same impression was
Yeah.
just ludicrous. Is ludicrous. So I think we're getting into a kind of a post Google phase if we're now looking ahead. And that is going to be more defined by less about trying to trick Google, then it's going to be more of a level playing field. There's no question that when the dust settles on this, and we're talking several years out, obviously, that it will be more level playing field for publishers, for buyers, for independent ad tech like ourselves. And this will be the era of streaming and CTV, and that will be the tens of billions of global dollars that will be coming into the ecosystem that have been out of the reach because of the way it was being delivered. I think you're going to look back 5 years from now, and I think you will see those as two major themes that are different from previous themes.
Now, because everything is changing every 5 years, like what type of CEO do you think does well in this environment? Because it's not it's not one where like an optimization thing is going to work because it's so hard to know what you should be optimizing because everything could change. You need someone who somehow can like both be a great operator, but also be a great product person and be someone who can embrace, uncertainty. So if you're like betting on CEOs, how would you bet on them?
Yeah, and it's an exercise that I've gone through, exercise I've done on boards, and it isn't easy. I think I think like anything, whether it's public or private, if it's an ad technology, it has to match the flavor of the company. If it's a product led company, a product organization led company, I think it's really difficult and challenging trying to change that DNA. And so I would
Yeah.
say that I would definitely default to someone with product experience. But if it's more of a sales and marketing organization, more of a financially driven, let's just say you're putting together a bunch of companies in a portfolio, and it's all about capital efficiency, and it's all about purchase price, and it's all about running at an efficient level, then that creates another profile. But ultimately, it has to be someone that can partner very closely with their leadership team, because no one's going to have the skill set to be able to address all the nuances of it. And it's very nuanced, right? I mean, it is absolutely, you need to know what's happening in the market on a quarterly basis, daily basis, to be able to make these decisions for longer term. And I think you just have to stop kidding yourself that there's such a thing as called a 5-year plan in this industry, because it's just not possible.
If you think of the CEOs that have run companies that have had like increasing market caps and been effective, like you are really the only one that wasn't the founder of the company and kind of the product oriented. Obviously, you have Jeff Green at the trade desk. You have Adam Pierogi, who is at AppLovin. Like you're almost the exception, not the rule, of somebody who came in who's just like an incredibly good operator. What makes you successful? Like, why were you able to succeed where so many other people who have tried it was not able to be successful?
Yeah. and that's we caveat that with saying that I am succeeding. However, generally speaking, if you're in my role and you're not the founder and have never been a founder, you usually get the call when there's like a spill on aisle 3. And
right.
things aren't going up.
Right, because when you originally took over, which was then Rubicon, it was like 100 million market cap or something.
Yeah. We had 125 million in cash and 100 million market cap.
Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah.
There's a certain latitude in that, right?
Then you have a lot more ways to just.
It
can't get worse.
Yeah, it literally couldn't get worse.
When your market cap is negative $25 million, you can't get worse, I guess.
If you drove it to negative 50, no one's gonna be terribly upset about that.
Totally.
I think it also gives you a and it sounds kind of weird, but what it does is it gives you a chance to be patient. Because you can't turn that. If this has been going on for 7 years and you've been slowly dying and you didn't realize it, and then you wake up one day and it's almost over, you can't. It's 90 days isn't going to fix it, right? You have to, as a matter of fact, when the board did hire me at Rubicon, they came back. They said to me, if you dare come back with a 90-day plan, we know we got the wrong guy.
That's actually that they had a lot of foresight, because that's not common. Yeah.
And so there is this pace where you're basically have a year of forgiven. You're forgiven. You are making harder decisions. You're doing the right thing. And it gets worse before it gets better in almost every case, because it's almost always more messed up than you thought when you were going.
Right. You come in and you're like discovering. I imagine the first 90 days, you're just like, oh my God, another one. Oh, another problem.
Oh Lord, yes.
Or you thought this was at least this part of the company was going well. It turns out that company also has had all these issues and everything.
Yes, right. And then all of a sudden the tech debt and all the fun stuff.
Now, what do you like if you're advising someone who's doing a turnaround, because you've really successfully done this turnaround? Like, what beside for that, what else would you advise them? Would you be like, okay, cut more early? What else would you advise them that you think is more universal?
Yeah, 100%. I think that when you look back on anything you do, and this flies a little bit in the face what I said, but there's a sweet spot between 90 days and a year. And probably it should always have been 3 months earlier. You should have the confidence in your conviction and in knowing full well that there's very little you could do to the company where folks aren't going to be like, I get it. You got to do something to fix it. You got to use that period of time to your advantage. And almost always when I look back on things, we could have done it faster, not years faster, but we could have taken the pain quicker and the recovery would have been more accelerated.
And how do you because you have all these constituents you have to communicate to the employees. You've got to communicate to your shareholders. You've got to communicate to your customers who are worried that you're going to still be in business, right? How do you think about this communication problem during these turnarounds?
I think the most important folks out of the gate is 100% your team members, your employees. Because if they don't have the
they're not excited.
If they don't have the conviction, if they don't have the excitement, then you've lost. It doesn't matter what your customers think. All right.
Yeah.
But you have to do that in tandem and parallel with the customers, and rebuild faith, trust, get rehired if you've been fired.
Yeah.
And know that it's going to be a longer road, but you can't do it without your team on board, and that's not easy because you're very shortly into any of your tenure. If you're coming in, there is that come to Jesus moment where you have to turn to the company and say, this may not be the company that you originally joined and liked.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, no harm, no foul, but please do us all a favor and depart now if that's the way you feel, because
okay, here's the new vision. Here's what's going on. You had signed up for this 3 years ago, but it's changing, and you've got to kind of almost re-sign up if you want to be here for and be effective.
Yeah, and people tend to be very honest about it. You'll when you do that speech and you walk away, you feel real good about yourself, and then 90 people quit.
Yeah,
and you're like, well, I hope it's the right 90.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably good. You want people opting into. They're going to be more successful if they opt in, and hopefully they're opting in not because it's their only option. If it's I can't find another job, well, that's bad. But if they have many options yet they're still opting in, then that's a good sign.
Yeah. First sign of signing up, right?
Now, part of your success is, you've really been incredibly good at M&A, and you've done a ton of deals at Rubicon, now Magnite, and they've seemed, I'm sure maybe you wish some of them went better or something, but they seem to have done extremely well and been very, very successful. Most of the folks in ad tech and also really anywhere in technology have had a very spotty record of M&A. Most M&A has not done well. What are you doing right? What could we all learn from you?
Well, my first advice is if you can avoid it, don't do it. Because it never works out exactly as you plan. And it is high risk. But I guess my biggest piece of advice is if you're not doing it from a position of strength, it's never going to work. How many times do we see, player 6 team up with player 8, and in theory they should be player 3 because of their combined revenue.
Yeah.
And they're still the 6th player and the 8th player, and the market doesn't care. So if you're not a leader and you're not doing this to accelerate your leadership position, I think M&A is a really horrible idea. But
I've seen that happen all the time when they're buying or they're trying to get a new market. They buy the number 4 or 5 player, and they stay number 4 or 5. In fact, it slowly degrades. Because they don't have the product chops at the top to really make it happen. And eventually they just kind of some ways just write it off.
Yeah, and in almost every case, if you're in that tier and you're doing M&A, it's with a cost structure focus first, which is also a mistake. Because if all you're doing is combining and saying we can take $40 million of costs out of the system and that's it, that's hard to charge the hill and get your people all excited.
There are companies where they have done more M&A than their than all of their market cap. They've spent more money on M&A than their market. So it's clearly value destructive, right?
Yeah.
There was, back in the day, there was this company Newstar that was like that, where they're constantly doing M&A, and they spent probably 3x the market cap of the company on M&A or something.
Yeah, it's just never the quick fix. But in the case of Telaria, what went well was kind of product market fit. We were the largest omni-channel programmatic platform, but didn't have a lick of CTV. we looked at the build buy partner and quickly came up with it had to be, we couldn't build it fast enough. Partnering, it was too strategic. So buy had to be the option.
Yep.
Mark Zagorski at the time was now doing a great job at Double Verify. He was running Talari at the time. We got friendly. We started talking about the things that were keeping us both up at night. He was a subscale public company. I was a subscale public. Bringing it together provided more scale, but more importantly, it made a lot of sense that all of a sudden now you have one player that's the leader in CTV and the leader in non-CTV, and it makes a ton of sense.
But at the time, like I remember when you guys were doing that, like that was a super risky. It was super ballsy to do that because like you guys were both, somewhat evenly sized, and you're both. It's very hard to like mash those two things together and be successful.
Well, even worse, the way it happens. So there's usually an M&A, there's an acquirer and there's a seller. This was the art term was merger of equals,
yes,
and so it
literally and those almost never work.
Not only never works, you have to go outside and get fairness opinions when you're a public company. And so the guy finishes the fairness opinion, and as he's leaving, he goes, these things never work. He said, I've never been involved in a fairness opinion of a merger of equal transaction that's worked. I was like, that's
my
great.
Gosh. Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
So the social aspects of it can kill just as easily as the financial structure.
So you mean like the cultures, putting them together and stuff like 100%,
that? Yeah.
And one of the things you did was you changed the name of the, so it's like, okay, we're going to change the name totally of everything. Like that was almost like a necessary thing that one had to do, right?
It was dictated by the terms of the merger of agreement. Like, I'm not kidding. Merger of equals is, you get 5 board members, I get 4. But if I'm the one with 4, I get the chairman. Okay, you get the marketing guy, but you have to take our lawyer. You get the sales guy.
Yeah. Okay, got it. It's like a real. It's like
crazy. The fact that it worked is nuts. But we caught a lucky break, and this sounds morose, but COVID hit right as we announced the deal, and one of the biggest aspects of social challenges, culture, is offices. What office are you going to pick? Who gets which desk? Getting the folks together.
Yeah, that could be really petty, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It kills it. It can kill it. And so now all of a sudden, everyone's trapped at home, and there's this level of empathy in the early days. I don't know if you remember, but everyone got the benefit of the doubt because everyone's going through this uncharted world, and folks were like, that person kind of came across as a jerk, but he seems like an okay guy. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. And it actually really helped us. It didn't hurt us. It went on too long. Like everyone can say it went on too long.
Yeah.
But when we finally got into the office together, it wasn't as jarring an experience. It was just an elation to be able to get back in together.
Yeah. And then you did SpotX, which was another just massive kind of like acquisition. Like, how do you just feel like, all right, well, we almost like it was a crazy first time and it worked out, so we're gonna like go again, and that one worked out too. Like, how did you think about that one?
That was one of those ones where it wasn't terribly planned because we never thought that SpotX was going to be put up for sale. At the time, they were owned by a German company, RTL, and they'd been owned by them for 6-7 years. And when that came to market, it immediately got us rethinking about our marketplace position. We felt as though we had built a pretty differentiated company, and this has only been for a year, but people could say what Magnite was and what it wasn't. And that hasn't always been the case in ad technology. And our biggest concern is if SpotX were acquired by a competitor, we would lose that differentiation instantly. And so we just needed to do more. We wanted to bring on more. It was actually quite complementary in terms of the customer set, but it was going to be even worse than Talari in the terms of the fact that we knew that one platform had to be deprecated. We knew that there were going to be more losers than winners in the deal because you're going to have redundancy. And so it carried with it its own flavor of risk. I like to say it was all up and to the right, but it wasn't. There was some really tough quarters in terms of putting it together. getting the culture built, but I feel really, really good that we've come out of it, and the assets that we have, the folks that we have, we're so much stronger for it.
Got it. Okay, cool. And a couple questions we ask all of our guests. What is a conspiracy theory that you believe?
Well, I think you got to go with there are UFOs. Now, whether they're being driven by green people from Mars or whatever the case might be, but there's just so much evidence that's coming out about these unidentified aerial objects or flying objects or whatever you want to refer to them as. And so I'm a big believer there that something's out there.
Okay. All right. I like it. Last question we ask all of our guests. What conventional wisdom or advice do you think is generally bad advice?
We kind of touched on that, and that is the idea that the default mode of a leader coming in or a leader anointed that came up through the ranks, it's almost like default has to be action, right? Default has to be, I need to see something in 90 days. I need to see something in 100 days that puts your stamp on this, that your thumbprints are all over the idea that this is now your company and this is now the vision that we have, and the concept that the folks that came before you didn't have any vision, and so ergo it only took you 3 months to come up with a vision or refine it. I think that patience is important.
Is it less patience and more like humility?
I think I think they kind of go hand in glove, right? I mean, humility is the ability to, in my mind, in the business setting, is the ability to kind of walk into the room and know you're not going to know everything that everyone in that room has, and go in listen mode. And your default shouldn't be action mode. In many cases, I feel where I've enjoyed a modicum of success.
Well, this is great. Thank you, Michael Barrett, for joining us on World of DaaS. I follow you on LinkedIn, and I definitely encourage our listeners to engage with you there. This has been super interesting. I love the deep dive. We've been friends for a long time, and I'm really excited to make this happen.
Thanks, Auren. Really appreciate the time.
And if you're a super data nerd, go to worldofdaas.com. That's DAAS, worldofdaas.com, and sign up for our weekly Data as a Service news roundup newsletter. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this show, consider rating this podcast and leaving a review. For more World of DaaS, and DaaS is DAAS, you can subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere you get your podcasts. And also check out YouTube for videos. You can find me at Twitter at Auren, that's AUREN, Auren, and we'd love to hear from you.